So let's review our answers from the webquest that you did in class yesterday. First, we want to talk about the highest recorded temperature ever in the world, and I want to tell you a little story behind our answer that we're going to find here. Prior to 2012, if you did an internet search, you would have found this number, and there still might have been a couple of you that would have gotten that number had I not told you the latitude and longitude. 136 degrees 1922 in Libya. Well, up until very recently, Libya was ruled by Muammar Gaddafi, who was a dictator, and he was ostracized by the rest of the world, and he had a closed country. And people were suspect about this temperature record. They didn't think it was right. They didn't think the scientists took the temperatures correctly. But they couldn't gain access to the historical records in the country because it was ruled by a dictator, and he said basically, no, you're not coming into my country. Well, after he left power in 2012, scientists went in there, started looking at the records and the data, and they figured out that no, the people that recorded these temperatures didn't do it right. This 136 degree temperature is not legit. So, ever since then, the highest temperature ever in the world is now considered to be 134 degrees, and it happened July 10th, 1913 in Death Valley, California. So this is now considered to be the world record temperature, 134 degrees. Now, let me preface this. It's probably been hotter someplace else on this planet, but there was nobody there to record it. There was no weather station that was recording the temperatures. So, with a little bit of a stipulation that you have to understand, these temperature records are the highest and coldest that somebody's actually been there to witness it. Now, some Death Valley facts. Average daily high of 115 and only a low of 87 during the month of July. This is the kind of heat we're talking about. In 2012, they saw 24 days with 120 or higher. On July 12th, 2012, the overnight low was only 107. That's as cold as it got in a 24-hour period. And in 1974, the temperature was 100 degrees for 134 straight days. That's a third of the year. Here I am in summer of 2017, the day I happened to be in Death Valley, and this was my third or fourth trip there, and this was the hottest I had ever experienced. It was 121 degrees. Not much you can do at 121 degrees. They have a lot of signs telling you, warning you about being outside. I decided to go for a run. It was miserable. I'll tell you more about that if you want to know. But let's talk about why Death Valley is so hot, and there are 4 reasons. So let's think latitude, right? Because sunlight makes a big difference. Well, that's not the case for Death Valley. Look where it is with that red pin. It's actually north of Atlanta. It's north of Florida. So it's not that it gets so much concentrated sunlight, because it doesn't. First reason is elevation. Here's a picture in the bottom of Death Valley, and you turn around and you look back up on the hill and you see a sign that says sea level. And you see the Badwater Basin sign. You're 282 feet below sea level. Well, when you get that low, you know that the lower you go, the higher the temperatures are. So you are as low as you can go in North America. It's going to naturally be hotter because you're down lower. You can see it here on this topographic map. You can see there's the low point between 2 mountains, and the air just sinks in there. Well, the sun comes out and the air starts hitting each other more often, and it can't even get out of there because it's stuck in that little low point. So it just hits each other all day long and gets hotter and hotter and hotter. Reason number 2. Well, take a look at this picture. It's pretty dry. There's not much evidence of any water here. And we know that dry things heat up easily. And as you can see, it's very dry in Death Valley. So the temperatures will very easily get hot because there's no water to help keep the temperatures low. So reason number 1 is elevation. It's really low. Reason number 2 is that it's very, very dry. And that kind of leads us into reason number 3. We're missing something in these pictures that does a really good job of helping keeping temperatures down, and that's plants. There's absolutely almost no plants in Death Valley. And without plants to help keep the temperatures from getting hot, because they all soak up that sunlight and photosynthesize, temperatures are just going to skyrocket. Well, why aren't there any plants? Because there's no water. Reason number 4. Notice this arrow here is pointing to a nice clear sky because Death Valley is one of the sunniest places on the planet. So they very rarely have any cloud cover. Well, without that high albedo from clouds to reflect some sunlight, all the sunlight's going to hit the ground and it's just going to make temperatures rise and rise and rise. So those are the 4 reasons that all combine to make Death Valley exceptionally hot. Now, why so few clouds and water? It's not that far from the Pacific Ocean, but if we look at the elevation here, there's a bunch of big mountains that get in the way of any water ever getting into Death Valley. So that's why it is exceptionally hot. You can't get the water there because all the water gets trapped up in the mountains before it's able to get into Death Valley. Lowest temperature ever recorded on Earth is negative 128 in Antarctica, the Russian scientific research station. To give you some sense here of how cold 128 degrees is, you can have no exposed skin at all for any period of time without getting frostbite. So these guys that walk around outside, they have to be entirely covered up. No bare skin exposed, or else they risk killing the cells and getting frostbite. So why is the lowest temperature on the planet ever recorded in Antarctica? Well, it has to do with 2 things. One, it's really, really, really far south, so they don't get much sunlight. And 2, because it's all snow and ice, most of the sunlight is reflected and can't be used to raise temperatures anyway. Oh, and I forgot, there's a 3rd reason. 3rd reason is there's so much land that you can get far enough away from the water where you don't get the extra heating from convection currents in the ocean. Now, let me preface that record. It has been colder than that in Antarctica. Certainly has. But it wasn't any place where there was somebody there to record the temperature. So for our purposes, that's the coldest that anybody looked at the thermometer and saw a temperature, negative 128. So we know Antarctica. But, you know, Antarctica, sure, it's a special case, and nobody lives there. Let's talk about the world record coldest temperature where people actually have to live with it. And that's negative 90 in Russia. Happened twice, 1892 and 1933. It's the name of that city you looked up, begins with an O. It's in the Sakha Republic. Don't ask me to say it, but the Sakha Republic is kind of like equivalent to kind of what our states are. Why was that lowest temperature in the world that outside of Antarctica? Why was it northern Siberia? Why wasn't it, in Alaska or Canada? It has to do with the water again. Remember that we looked at this before, that northern Russia gets a lot colder than other places because there's no way for the water from the equator to get there and bring some heat up there. So they remain exceptionally cold. If you think about Alaska, well, Alaska can get heat from the equator because the water can expand up there. So we would expect our record cold temperatures to be in northern Russia. So let's talk about Alaska. Lowest temperature ever recorded in the United States was negative 80. Prospect Creek, Alaska, 1971. Prospect Creek's not much of a town. It's just a way station basically on the Dalton Highway, which if you've ever seen the show Ice Road Truckers, this is the road that they're traveling on. Why is that where we've had our coldest temperature? Well, there's 2 reasons. One, Alaska's really far north, so they don't get much sunlight. And the sunlight they do get gets really spread out. So really far north, weak sunlight. The second reason is in Alaska, you can get really far away from the water. And the farther away you get from the water, the more your temperatures are going to change, hot and cold. So that's the reason why we can have that USA record cold temperature is going to be in Alaska. But let's talk about outside of Alaska, because Alaska is kind of a special case. The lowest temperature outside of Alaska, kind of in a regular state down here where we all are, is negative 70 at Rogers Pass, Montana, 1954. Okay, well, what was so special about Montana that it got the coldest of any other state down here? Well, there's 2 reasons. One, Montana's really far north. So, once again, its sunlight gets very, very weak in the wintertime. but there are other states that get just as limited sunlight. The difference is with Montana has some really, really high mountains. You know that tall mountains can get a lot colder than lower elevations. So, two reasons why Montana sets the continental U.S. cold record: low temperature, really far north, really high mountains. The highest temperature ever for Georgia is 112 degrees in Louisville in 1953. And pay close attention to where Louisville is there on the map, because this leads into the question of, why Louisville? Why not further south in Georgia? Why not someplace where the elevation was actually lower than it is in Louisville? The trick is that as you go further south, you get closer to the Gulf of Mexico or the Atlantic Ocean, and you have that effect from the water that keeps the temperatures from going up as high as you would expect them to go. So Louisville is Georgia's record high temperature because it's away from the water. Now, it's not going to be any place in North Georgia, because by the time you get into North Georgia, the elevation has gotten too high, and that's going to help keep things cool. So our record high temperature is going to be somewhere in the middle of the state here. Going down here, too close to the water. Going up here, too high of elevation. Lowest temperature ever is negative 17 degrees. It's up there near Rome. You guys, you found the Chattahoochee-Oconee National Forest. You found a bunch of different there's old Johns Creek that runs up there, recreation areas. Okay, the important fact here is to know that the negative 17 is as cold as it's ever gotten here. Why would we expect it to be up there? Because that's in North Georgia where the mountains are. Highest temperature ever in Atlanta was 106, set not too long ago, and the lowest temperature was negative 8. And that kind of leads us in the question of, why would Georgia's record high not ever be in Atlanta? Well, it's because Atlanta, as you can see from this map, Atlanta is going to be up here. It's too high in elevation than these places in the middle of the state. So we're always 5, 6, 7 degrees cooler here because you're higher in elevation than you are in the rest of the state. Why would Atlanta not ever have the record cold temperature? Well, because once you get further north from Atlanta, you get into higher mountains that are going to be more cold on a consistent basis. Okay, let's talk about yearly averages. Barrow, Alaska has the lowest average temperature of any city in the U.S., 10 degrees. Take every high, every low, 365 days a year, and you can say the average temperature in Barrow, Alaska is 10 degrees. That's really cold. Now some temperature facts for Barrow, like we did for Death Valley. Average high temperature in July, their summertime, 47 degrees. That's colder than what we have in our average winter days. The all-time highest temperature was 79. That's as warm as it's ever gotten, and I'm sure people in Barrow, Alaska were just mystified by that. They thought it was a heat wave like no other. The daily temperature goes above freezing for only about a third of the year. That means 2/3 of the year it doesn't get above freezing. So that's the kind of temperatures we're talking about. So they have below zero temperatures about half of the year. On average, you only get to 50 degrees about 24 days a year. That's our winter temperatures. Our winter high temperatures are around 50, 51 degrees. Barrow only gets our winter temperatures for about 24 days a year. Some other sidebar fact: the International Falls, Minnesota, which is called the country's ice box, they have the lowest average year-round temperature of any city in the continental U.S., about 37 degrees. The place with the highest average temperature in the world is Dulul, Ethiopia. Take every high, every low, every day, 365 days a year, and you're going to average it out to be 94 degrees. That's what the average temperature is in this location. That's really hot, especially for that to be the average between summer and winter. Other places get a little bit more of a winter, so it kind of brings that average down. But Dulul is always hot. Atlanta's average yearly temperature is 61. Take our winter and our summer, we average out to 61. Imagine taking a place and their average comes out to be 94. So why is the temperature so hot year-round in Ethiopia? why wasn't it Death Valley? Well, here's the difference between Ethiopia and Death Valley. Ethiopia is really close to the equator, so its sunlight basically never changes. It's a really dry place, has very few plants, but its sunlight is consistent. Look at Death Valley. Look how far it is from the how far north it is from the equator. Yeah, it gets really hot in the summertime, but the wintertime, when that part of the planet is tilted away, the sunlight gets so weak in Death Valley that it brings the temperatures down to a much cooler level. Ethiopia never gets that. The sunlight's always directly overhead, so it's always going to be hot more consistently year-round. Death Valley has gotten hotter in the summertime because it has all those other factors like the low elevation and the mountains that block the water and so forth. But year-round, Ethiopia has a higher average temperature because it sits on the equator. The city with the highest average year-round temperature in the United States is Key West, 78 degrees. That's still pretty warm. So what happened January 22nd, 1943 at 7:30 in the morning? Okay, at 7:30 in the morning, they took the temperature, and it was -4 degrees in the Spearfish, South Dakota. 2 minutes later, 2 minutes, the temperature was 45 degrees above zero. The temperature went up 49 degrees in 2 minutes, and that is a record that still stands. More impressively, by 9 a.m., the temperature had gone up to 54. That's a pretty good day, especially in January in South Dakota. But then the winds died down, and the temperature went right back down to -4. A 58-degree temperature drop in 27 minutes. So this date in history is the day where the planet has experienced its greatest temperature swing at one time. Now, there's other ways to classify temperature swing. Greatest one-day temperature swing. In Loma, Montana, it went from -54 to 49 degrees in the course of a day. That's a change of 103 in one day. Now imagine that would be like Atlanta going from a temperature of 103 down to a temperature of 0. So to put that in perspective for you, that's the kind of temperature change we're talking. The greatest 12-hour temperature change, once again in Montana. December 14th, it was 63 degrees, which is pretty doggone warm for Montana. And then it went to -21 degrees at midnight, which is an 84-degree change. That's in 12 hours. So that's basically in the time that you wake up before the time you go to bed, the temperature has changed 84 degrees. So if you have any questions about any of these records or anything else you would like to know beyond this, please feel free to ask them of me, or we'll have a discussion. Otherwise, continue with the lab that you are working on, and then you will get the conclusion statements that you will have to complete for your done stamp.